name's Todd Miranda. In this video, I'm going to show you how to skin a WPF Windows application. So in Visual Studio 2005, let's do File, New, and we'll create a new WPF Windows application project, and we'll give it a name. Now before we go a whole lot further, let me just point out that WPF really doesn't have the concept formally of a skin, or for that matter doesn't have the concept of skinning. But what we're going to do is we're going to use WPF's dynamic resource mechanism to facilitate the act of skinning. So what we're talking about when we say skinning is we're really referring to changing the look and feel, or the appearance, the colors, that kind of thing, of the application, and changing that dynamically. So being able to switch an entire color scheme, or switch the entire visual scheme of the application, and be able to do that in a dynamic fashion. So let's look how we facilitate that in WPF, and let's begin by just jumping right into some code. We have in our window by default a grid as a layout mechanism, and that's perfect. That'll work out just great. So let's create some column definitions, and we're going to create just 2 columns, and we'll specify a width of a star for the first one, and then specify a width of, let's say 3 star for the second one. So if you're not familiar with that asterisk or that star notation, what that effectively means is when it builds these columns, it's going to put 2 columns there. The second column will be 3 times the width of the first column. So that's really what that star notation means in this concept, or in this context. So we're going to do some row definitions. And our row definitions, we want 2 row definitions as well, but we'll just let them size dynamically, which is effectively by default going to size half and half, so it'll be 50-50 that it'll split the grid in a vertical fashion. Okay, so we've got our columns and our rows specified, so now let's create some controls here, and we'll create a label. And our label content will be something like, let's say, street address. So this might be where somebody might enter a street address into our system. And we're going to do a horizontal alignment. In the horizontal alignment, we're going to align this to the right. And vertical alignment, we want to align this to the center, let's say. Alright, that's good for now. And then we'll come in here and we'll put a text box. And we're going to put our text box, default text will be enter a street address. Okay. And we're going to say horizontal alignment here is center as well. And vertical alignment is going to be center. Actually, that's not right. Let's change this to left. Now by default, horizontal alignment would be left in a text box, but that's fine. We'll go ahead and specify it there anyway. Okay, so let's end that. I want to do a few other things to our text box. First thing I want to do is give it a name, so that we'll be able to reference this not only in code behind if we needed to, but there's another reference that I want to use in case you haven't seen a particular functionality of a label in WPF. So we'll call this text address. Alright, so now we've got our controls. Let's go ahead and specify that we want this to be in the second column. Columns are 0 based in WPF, and we want it to be in the first row. And the same thing here, we want it to be in this first column, also in the first row. And the one thing I wanted to show was we're going to specify a target here. Target in a label allows us to do some nice functionalities with a label and a text box, and we'll actually see exactly what I'm talking about. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to do a binding statement, and we're going to bind to an element. So we'll specify element name, and we'll reference our text box. And really for performance reasons, what we can do is we can come in here and specify that we want our mode to be one way, because there's no sense in dual binding that. We're just simply going to bind one way for our element. Okay, so we've got a label and a text box. Let's come down here and let's put a button. And maybe we'll put this button in, let's say we're going to put this in the second column. but we're going to put it in the second row as well. Definitely need to specify that. We'll specify that our content for our button is, maybe this is add, or maybe not add, maybe it's save street address. We're not going to really build the functionality for this anyway, but that way we have some semblance of consistency. So let's go in here as well, and we're going to specify a horizontal alignment. And our horizontal alignment for this, let's say that our horizontal alignment is left and our vertical alignment is top, so we'll put it at the top. Now if we go up here and click in our design view, we'll see some refreshing here, and we'll see that that we do have our street address label and our street address text block. And I am going to go up here and we're going to change this to where the second column is twice the size of our first column. And that way we see all of our label. It's just an easy way to do that. Okay, so that really gives us the overall idea of our application. So let's build this. And we get a successful build, and let's run it so we can see what we've got so far. Okay, great. So there's our application. We can click in here in our text box and we can type some text. We could technically come in and specify a click event for our button. Now, one thing I wanted to show was, notice the street address text here of our label. If we hold down the Alt key, oh, you know, there's one thing that I forgot. When we specify a target with our label, we need to come into the content of our label, and we need to specify an underscore just before one of the letters. Any one of the letters, doesn't matter what it is here in this particular case. So let's save and run that again so I can show you what I was trying to do with that target particular property. Okay, so now if I hold down the Alt key, notice the underline shows up under S in street. So if we click the Alt S, focus gets placed into our text box. Just a nice feature that I thought I would show while we were in here building this particular form, and that's a feature of labels in WPF. Okay, great. So that's pretty humdrum. So what we want to do is let's go over here to our app.xaml, and we're going to open this guy up, and we're going to specify some styles in our resources. So we're going to create some styles here, and the first style, we'll specify a target type of label, and we'll give it a key, which is the name that we'll reference this by over in our page again. And we're just going to call this label style. And our label style might be something like this. We may have a setter. The property that we want to set might be foreground, and the value for that is going to be blue. And maybe we're going to come in and set the font size property and value. We'll set that to 12 pixels. Okay, and then maybe we've got another style here, since we've got a number of elements, and its target type will be text box, and its key will be text style. Not very creative, but it'll work for us. And I'll tell you what we're going to do this time. Instead of specifying a style here, we're just going to leave this a blank style. Now, what that does, as far as by default, is it does not affect the text box. So we're not going to give the text box a style other than the default. So it'll just fall right back to the default style for our text box. And that's exactly what we want. Matter of fact, we're going to do the same thing for our button. So we'll specify our target type is a button, and we'll come in here and we'll call this button style. Okay, so there's our default style sheet, and we've created label style, text style, and button style. So let's save this. We'll go back over to our window here, and we'll come down here, and in label we'll specify a style. Now here's one thing that's very important. We don't want to specify static resource here. We want to specify dynamic resource. And if you're wondering, the difference between the two well, there's a couple of differences really kind of under the covers, but the difference in the two is a dynamic resource simply says, prepare this style in such a way that I can dynamically change this style once the application is running. Whereas a static resource says, okay, I expect the style to already exist when I run, and I'm going to set that style to that particular element. So a dynamic resource says, you know what, the style may or may not exist. We're going to dynamically change that or dynamically set that at runtime. So we'll use dynamic resource, and we'll use our incredibly creative style name, dynamic resource style. And we'll just copy this style block so that we can be sufficiently lazy. And we'll call this text box style, and this is button style. And I'm going to go back and make sure that I called that text style. Let's go back and make that text box style. That makes a little more sense. I was afraid of that. Okay, so now we've applied the styles to our particular elements. So let's run this again and let's see what we get. Okay, so what you see here is that our text box and our button were not affected because we just had an empty style element there. But by putting the empty style element, it allowed us to reference the style in our XAML, which is the important part. But you see that we did apply the style to our label. It's a font size of 12. It's slightly larger than the default font size here, and it's blue. So the important part that I was talking about was we need to specify a style for all the elements that we want to skin. So in order to specify a style, we need to have a style to be able to specify. So even though we don't necessarily, over here in our style block, we don't necessarily want to change anything about the default style of that particular element, we do want to specify a style, and that way we can reference that style over here in our page, and thusly is going to allow us to dynamically change that style later on down the road. Okay, so we've got the styles, we've applied the styles to our elements, we've seen that those styles have taken effect. Let's add a click event handler for our button. And once again, to remain with the theme tonight of being incredibly creative with our naming, we're going to call that button click, and I'll just copy that so we can go to the back end and add that event handler. So we'll do a void and paste. And we're going to do, this is a object, sender, routed event args e. Okay, so there's our button click event, and now is where the magic is going to happen. We're going to dynamically change the look and feel of the application, or if you want to consider that, we're going to change the skin of the application dynamically when we click the button. So let's see how we do that. First thing is we need to add a couple of additional using statements here at the top of our page. Now technically you could remove many of these because we're really not using them, but for now we'll just leave that. So we've got system.io and using system.windows.markup. Okay. So those are the two that we need to use. System.io because we're going to actually reference the file system to grab a hold of our new file that we're going to create, and then markup because we want to actually use what we call XAML reader to be able to read that XAML in. Alright, so we've prepared the back end to be able to do our style switching. We need to have something to switch to. So how do we do that? What kind of a file are we going to use for our skins? Well, what's great about WPF is these nice resource dictionary files. So we're going to add a resource dictionary file to our project. We'll do new. We're going to do project, add new item. We'll specify a resource dictionary, a WPF resource dictionary, and let's call this crazy style.xaml. Alright, so here's our resource dictionary. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to go back to our application block, and I'm going to copy these styles that we created in our application block so I can make sure that I include all the styles and I do them right here. Okay, so let's change this a little bit. Obviously for our crazy style we want to be crazy, so we're going to specify a value for our foreground of red. We want to make it big, so we want to blow it out of the water, so 16 pixels. And now we're going to specify some styles for our text box. So in our text box, let's do this. Let's do a setter, property, and we're going to do background, and we'll put a setter value block in here, and we're going to specify a linear gradient brush with a start point of 0, 0 and an end point of 1, 0. This gives us a horizontal gradient, and then we'll come in here, we'll put some gradient stops in here, and we'll specify an offset here of maybe maybe this is 0.1, offset of 0.1, and the color there is going to be, sure, Alice Blue will work, and then we'll specify another couple of gradient stops in here. Maybe we'll go halfway across, and we'll specify a maybe this will be okay, antique white, that works. And then all the way across we'll specify we'll do aquamarine. I have no idea what this is going to look like, but that's okay, we'll find out together. And let's go to our button style, and let's do a setter in here, and we'll specify property, we'll specify foreground, and we'll set this to let's go with blue for our foreground here, and setter here, the property, let's set font size here as well, and we'll set this to let's set it to 16 as well, 16 pixels. Okay, so here's some additional styles now, some different styles from what we had originally. We'll save that particular file. One important thing to note here is we need to go into the properties for this particular file. We need to make sure that it's oops, not compile, that it's content. So it specify the build action of content, because we want to leave it as a XAML file. This is going to be one of our skin files. We want to copy it out to our output directory just as is, and we want to specify thusly that we want to copy this, and we'll just do copy if newer. Alright, so that's important. We really want to copy this out as a content file out to our directory, so remember to change that for your skin files. Now we've created our skin, our crazy skin file. Now we want to do the skin switching. Okay, so we're going to dynamically switch the skin at runtime. We're going to do that on a button click. So here's how we do that. We're going to specify that we've got a resource dictionary, and we'll just call this RD, and then we're going to do a using block with a file stream so that we can grab that particular file, and we'll do a file stream. We'll call that FS for file stream, and we'll say that we've got a new file stream, and here we want to specify the name of the file. So that's crazystyle.xaml, and then we want to specify that we want to open this file as file mode.open, and we want to open it in file access.read. Alright, so here's our using block with our file stream, and file stream, like I said, we're just going out, we're grabbing this particular file, we're going to open the file in read-only access, and here's what we're going to do while we're in there. We're going to do RD equals, and we're going to cast this to a resource dictionary, and we're going to use our XAML reader, and we're going to do a load on our XAML reader and pass it the file stream. So what this is going to do is it's going to read, it's going to use the XAML reader to load what's in our file stream, which is a XAML file, convert that to a resource dictionary when it pulls the XAML in, stored in our resource dictionary variable. And then we're going to say application.current.resources equal, and we're going to set the application resources to our resource dictionary that we just included, or our quote-unquote skin file that we just went out and grabbed. Alright, let's build this. Build succeeded, and let's run it. Alright, so here's our standard Windows application as we know it, and now we click on our button and we effectively change the style of our application just at runtime when we click the button. So you see that we get our gradient back here in our text block. Our text increased in size. We changed the color here, changed the color here. Now granted, in this particular demo we just did some crazy things just to really demonstrate that you can skin this application. We can change the look and feel of all the particular elements at runtime. And in this case we did it on a button click event. You could have a drop down that would allow a user to select the skin that they wanted to use, and it would effectively change the colors and the look and feel of all of the elements. You could make your styles even more complex. You could have a style setter element that sets the template of a control, and then specify a data template, or be able to specify a control template. So you could actually effectively change the template of a control as part of the skin. So you can see that while WPF doesn't have a formal definition of skin and skinning, we can use this dynamic resource capability to change XAML files, to be able to change resources and be able to change style blocks for the application at runtime, and give you the impression of being able to skin and thus change the skin of your application.